She thought it was her wedding day. Instead of vows, a wooden post slammed into place. York, England, AD 1692. The air reeked of ale, smoke, and sweat as bodies pressed in for a show. Churchwardens in black, merchants in fur, boys on barrels, eyes bright as knives. A rope looped her wrist and lifted high. A voice barked her price, iron scraping bone. Coins rang, laughter rose. A mother hid behind her fingers. She was no longer a bride, just property one sale among many this century, tried to forget. The man who once swore to love her before God grips the rope like a leash and drags her into the square. When the bell stops, the auctioneer's cry replaces the hymn. Chalk hisses across a plank. A number appears where a name should be. Nothing is secret. Everything is arranged to be seen. Silence counts as permission. The seller is her husband, the buyer a widower, the clerk the parish's hand with the book. The parish clerk stands near the post, not to bless, but to witness, feather twitching over vellum like a small, tireless insect. Would you let a crowd or an algorithm price you today? She keeps her gaze low, counting exits that are not exits. To run in a market is a crime. To stand still is a sentence. She tastes soot. Yesterday's promise change your life crumbles on her tongue, because here change your life means change your owner. Between shouts, a man in fur flicks her wrist, checking the grain of her skin the way he might check a horse's teeth. Another asks if she can carry water or prove she knows winter from want. The question is not who she is, but what she is worth. Power stands in a triangle. The former husband, the buyer, the keeper of the book. 3 posts make a cage you cannot see, but cannot cross. A churchwarden who came to watch says nothing. His silence thickens the air. A taxman tallies in the corner. If the crowd witnesses it, it happened. If the crowd laughs, it passes. The square is a stage, and law wears a workman's apron. The price climbs, copper to silver, silver to a promise written later. A boy claps each time a coin hits wood. Someone calls her pretty, someone else calls her sturdy, and both men mean the same thing. In another life, she wore flowers for a feast day and learned to dance around the pole. In this one, she is tied to it. The rope burns her wrist. The knot holds like winter. Ink slashes her skin, a mark to say agreement is near. Her name begins to shrink under the number like a candle guttering in a draft. A town prefers paper to memory. Paper is tidy. Paper forgets the sound a girl makes when the rope is first lifted. Transfer, the clerk will write. His letters neat, his hand steady, his eyes elsewhere. Across the crowd, a girl clutching an empty basket meets her gaze and does not look away. Recognition passes between them like a coin with no mint. No one moves. Everyone watches. Above them, the minster points at heaven, and its shadow falls on everything below in perfect order. They will call it a transfer. She will carry it like a scar. By morning, the ledger will catch her breath and turn it into ink. York, England, AD 1692. A market town where the bell marks the hours and the ledger measures the living. Morning finds the ink already dry. Her name was Agnes. She was 17. Her husband was Thomas Miller deep in debt, refused an annulment. The buyer was John Carter, a widower with a small holding. The parish called last night a transfer, not a sin. Streets remember feet. Agnes knows the curve of the shambles and the way the minster's shadow lays itself across the square like a quiet rule. Wet wool drips from lines behind shops. The brewer's door yawns warm and dark. A smith's hammer ticks inside the anvil's chest. Order here is a habit learned before speech. Cue at the oven, bow at the font, nod to the constable, step aside for a mare weighed down by winter. Law is not a single blade. It is a thicket. Custom, canon, parish practice, manorial dues, each a branch with its own burr. A husband's right is one path through it, the parish book another. The path that cuts you is the path that counts. If bonds must change hands, daylight is required, and a crowd that knows how to watch without seeing. Witness makes it real. Paper keeps it real. If a database erases consent today, what protects yours? Agnes can read a little, enough to know where she stands without touching the page. She has watched names march across vellum like ants, rents paid, bans read, fines forgiven. Men sign with an X and boast of it. Women listen and memorize. This morning, the clerk's feather scratches again, measured, patient, heartless. For a blink, she thinks the sound might be rain. It isn't. It is the town writing itself tidy. She hides the mark on her wrist beneath her sleeve and moves along the edges of the square. The butcher's boy looks up, down, up again, as if the meat has learned a new rate overnight. A church warden studies cabbages and buys none. The constable notes something that might be about cabbages and might be about Agnes. Memory in a small town is a net. Every corner knot knows who passed through it last night. Thomas is not a monster, only a man with a ledger closing on his fingers. John is not a savior, only a widower who thinks labor and companionship can be bought in the same coin. The parish prefers procedures that look like mercy and feel like management. Everyone tells themselves a story that lets them sleep. Agnes counts bell strikes to hold steady. She remembers feast days when the square wore flowers and she wore them too. Now flowers feel like a story told to make sleep come. She breathes the same air that forges tools and chains by the same fire and tastes the iron in it. She does not run. She does not argue. She adds what she can control to the small bag behind her ribs. Breathe evenly, carry water level, keep the name intact. By noon, the minster's shadow shortens, neat as a ruled line. The new house stands beyond it, a door that sticks in damp weather, a threshold polished by carrying water and by carrying silence. After dinner, the clerk will pass by to make sure the entry matches the world. He will not need to look at Agnes to do it. They will call it a transfer. She will carry it like a scar. And by nightfall, when the book closes over her name, the town will have its word ready for her life. Procedure. Outside, Lent thinned the market. Inside, rules stayed fat. The door sticks in the morning damp. Agnes sets her shoulder to it and learns how hard the wood wants to be moved. The house is small enough to memorize and large enough to hide in. 2 steps from the bed to the bucket, 3 to the door, 5 to the table. She counts them until the numbers settle into her bones. A draft threads the floor like a small river. Somewhere a mouse is writing its own story in the grain. There is bread to slice and water to carry, ash to sweep, and a fire to bank. John sets a stool by the hearth, checks the latch, and speaks in a voice that keeps each word on a leash. He says he rises with the bell, eats without waste, mends what can be mended, and expects the same from a house. He does not look at her when he says it. He does not need to. Habit is a language, and the room is fluent. Clarity comes like a nail through wood. If she runs, the constable calls it desertion. If she breaks anything, Thomas calls it theft. John could return her as unsuitable, but only by walking her back through the same square. So she chooses a smaller war. Learn the house faster than it can learn her. She moves through tasks as if they were a catechism. Stir, skim, fold. Knock spatter from a spoon against the rim and not the table. Stack kindling by thickness, coarse to fine. The knife's edge tells her what the loaf cannot afford to lose. When the jug is heavy, she keeps it level by holding her breath. When her sleeve rides up, she pulls it down before the mark can see daylight. The body can betray a person without meaning to. She teaches hers to be loyal. A neighbor woman comes by with a pot of barley and a face practiced at mercy. She does not ask questions that would make answers dangerous. She shows Agnes where soap lives and where the good rags are hidden. She names each drawer as if naming could tame it. When she reaches for Agnes's wrist to check the ink, she stops, changes the gesture mid-air, and points to the bucket instead. The kindness is imperfect and therefore real. John speaks sometimes of the field, the cow that kicked, the roof tile that wants replacing. He says we as if the word were a rope meant to pull two lives together. He does not touch her. He does not need to for the rope to tighten. At midday he leaves for the yard and returns with mud in the treads of his boots, a simple proof that work exists even when no one praises it. He sets tools in a straight line on the bench. She notices which tool sits farthest from the knife. Lent's meager noon keeps the street quieter than winter ever did. The minster's shadow shortens to a blade and then softens. Agnes eats the heel of the loaf and pretends not to notice she saved the better piece for later. Later is a country she still wants to visit. She finds a thin ribbon in her pocket, the color of river mud and stubborn as memory, and tucks it beneath the ledger shelf where no hand but hers will look. If anyone asks, it will be a nothing. To her, it is a compass. She practices her name behind shut teeth, not to make noise, but to keep shape. The sound is a small fire. She banks it with care so that a house can wake warm. When she lays out a blanket, she smooths the same crease twice in defiance of wrinkles. When she hangs a cloth to dry, she pins it by two corners and lets the middle sag like a held breath. By evening, she has a list of victories so small, no one else would count them. No spill, no break, no noise at the wrong time, no name surrendered. The room still belongs to the room, but it has begun to remember her weight. Outside, a bell marks the hour. Inside, the day files itself where the parish likes to keep it. Tidy. People in tidy towns sleep well. They will call what happened last night a transfer. What happens next has a quieter word, and it is the one Agnes learns today. Procedure. Public business wears a Sunday face. The parish clerk walks the edge of the square, counting witnesses the way a shepherd counts sheep. A thing done in daylight with enough eyes on it can pass for order. A thing written afterward in the parish book can pass for virtue. Thomas Miller learned that the hard way. He had rent arrears from a harvest that failed to keep its promises, tithe unpaid through Lent, a broken plow that refused to turn the clay, and a small fine after a stray pig found the Reeves cabbages. He asked the church to unmake his marriage, argued need and temper and bad luck, and met a door that did not open. Annulment cost coin and cause. He possessed too little of the first and too common a measure of the second. So he did what men do when law will not move, but hunger will. He turned to custom and the certainty of a crowd. John Carter did not think of himself as a buyer. He thought in winter words, fuel, labor, quiet, bread. A widower with a small holding and a roof that wanted mending, he believed that companionship and work could be measured by the same tokens. He came to the square sober, kept his offers plain, made sure a churchwarden stood within earshot. There would be ale after, not before. There would be a hand clasp, not a promise whispered in a corner. There would be a number everyone could hear. Public transfer let Thomas dodge annulment costs while keeping the parish in view. The square supplied the rest. One man to cry the terms, 2 witnesses to mark an X, a clerk to stroke the feather and turn breath into entry. No statute named the right, no priest blessed it, yet the crowd understood its steps as if they had learned them at the font. The rope was a sign more than a shackle, the plank a stage more than a courtroom. If there was laughter, it washed the edges from the act, and if there was silence, it stiffened it into form. Later hours or days, never long, The quarter sessions might hear a murmur of it in a complaint about disorder, or a constable might fine a man for nuisance if the shouting soured into a brawl. But most days, the town preferred tidy outcomes. A woman moved households. A man balanced a page. A clerk added a line neat enough to make daylight look like law. Thomas told himself he had saved 2 lives from worse. He told himself John could feed her better than he could, and that the parish would prefer a quiet square to a quarrel that ate up Sundays. He told himself that the price proved value, that the crowd's nod was consent, that he had chosen the least cruel path available. He avoided the minster door for a week all the same. John told himself he had bought labor and given shelter in the same act, that fairness lay in keeping food on the table and temper out of his voice. He set tools straight on the bench as if order could be contagious. He did not ask Agnes what she called any of this. He did not think the question was his to ask. Agnes did not argue with the book. The book did not argue back. She learned the word other people used for her movement from one house to another and folded it into her mouth until it lost its corners. Procedure. A way to keep things from spilling. The town slept better when it could explain itself. By week's end, the entry would be old news, the way last market's wool becomes this market's cloth. A dozen errands would pass the square and step over the place where a rope had lifted, where a number had rung, where a name had been taught to live underneath a line. Tomorrow the square will open its eyes again, and the town will call what it does by its favorite name. Market. Michaelmas crept closer. Woolmen swelled the square. A market day begins the way a story begins, with a voice loud enough to make a circle. The crier names the terms as if he were reading weather. A halter is shown, not tightened. A plank is set, not sanctified. The parish clerk stands where everyone can see his feather, and a church warden positions himself within earshot, so silence can count as approval. The rest is choreography, the kind a town can do in its sleep. First come the questions that pretend to measure virtue and only weigh labor. Can she carry water without spilling? Can she rise before the bell and keep the oven's small sun alive? Does she know winter from want? Men touch wrists as if judging grain, eye ankles as if they were hinges. Ask whether she is quiet, strong, obedient, careful. A laugh helps the questions go down. Laughter is oil on a difficult gear. Then come the offers, copper to silver, coin to promise, a tally scratched on a stick to be settled after Martinmas. A hand clasp fixes the number like a pin through cloth 2 palms pressed, a nod from the clerk, a line that will soon exist. Some buyers drink before they bid and add swagger to the rate. The sober ones do better, because sobriety is a kind of arithmetic. A boy counts out loud each time metal hits wood. The crowd corrects him with pleasure. What they call a bargain is simply a woman converted to labor. Not all sales look grand. Some happen at the edge of the square, where the noise is thinner and shame can breathe. A neighbor speaks for a neighbor. A husband explains that misfortune is not a sin. A widower promises bread, quiet, a roof that does not leak if the wind is kind. A church warden listens with the face of a wall. The constable wanders by twice and does not pause the second time. Daylight is the only license anyone needs. Count the prices you still pay, now, not then. There is a way the crowd helps the act pass for order. Mothers stand with their baskets as if waiting for flour. Boys climb barrels and pretend they are higher than law. Shopkeepers stop sweeping but do not put down their brooms. Each person practices the art of looking without seeing. If someone calls out a crude remark, 3 others laugh so the remark becomes smaller than the laughter. If someone looks stricken, 2 others crack a joke to sand the feeling down. Public comfort is a tool sharper than a knife. The clerk's feather travels, name to mark, mark to entry. Sometimes the man who sells signs an X like a boast, Sometimes he will not sign at all and lets the crowd serve as ink. Buyers prefer to pay in clean coins, but a promise dated to the next fair will do if a church warden nods. When the number lands, the halter's work is finished. It returns to its owner like any other rope, a tool for another day. Agnes watches more than she blinks. She counts who arrives sober and who arrives with ale on his breath. She notes which men test wrists and which men test words. She learns the square's grammar, the pauses where objections could live and the places where they would be trampled. She memorizes where the clerk stands on crowded days and where he stands when wool merchants thin the air with tall talk. Knowledge is a pocket knife, small, but it opens things. When the bidding ends, the quiet begins, the quiet of sums to settle and faces to forget. The crowd thins, the square exhales. The clerk closes his book not because he is finished, but because his entry has moved to other ledgers, the counting of bread, the rake of ash, the weight of hours. The market goes back to being market. The day looks ordinary again, which is its favorite disguise. By dusk, the town tells itself it has done nothing unusual. A woman changed households, money changed hands, a page balanced. No one says what begins after the price is paid. After the auction, the debt begins. Morning pays for night in small coins. The tally stick lies on John's bench like a thin bone. One notch marks the coin pressed into Thomas's palm. A smaller notch stands for the promise due at Martinmas. Agnes understands without touching it that her hours will pay the interest. She does not know the number. She does not need to. The house will tell her what it owes with every task it asks for twice. Water first. She learns the path to the pump at an hour when streets belong to Frost and Bakers. The bucket's handle bites the same place on her fingers each day until a small ridge grows to meet it. Back at the door, she sets the bucket down without a sound. Bread follows heel saved, crumb measured, knife kept loyal to the same cut. Ash next gray piled into a neat hill and carried to the garden so it can become a different kind of work later. The body remembers what the mind wants to forget, so she teaches her hands to move before her thoughts can trip them. Work will prove her value. Silence will keep it. John keeps his accounts like a man who knows that one wrong column can burn a winter. He lines tools by usefulness, hangs halters where light can find them, and counts the animals under his breath when he believes no one is listening. He does not shout. He does not need to. A quiet house is easier to manage than a loud conscience. When he leaves for the yard, Agnes watches the way his shoulders square at the door. She will learn that angle and know when to step aside. Neighbors test the edges of the story in passing. A woman brings whey and advice salted just enough to keep. A man drops by to borrow a tool he never borrowed before and takes inventory with his eyes. The church warden's gate is easy when he passes the window. Easy gates in small towns mean business has been filed under done. Agnes keeps her sleeves low. She answers what can be answered with a nod. She lets questions that want to be hooks slide through the water unbitten. Midday is a ledger written in chores. She skims cream and learns the temperature by wrist, not guess. She mends a hem with thread that bites back, and when the needle pricks, she does not flinch. Pain is a tax paid to belonging. She moves the knife from the edge of the bench to the far side of the bowl where it cannot be reached in anger without first moving work out of the way. Small maps make safe countries. There is weather in John's silences. When Det thinks in his head, his mouth keeps its corners, but his hands arrange themselves into lines. On those days, she puts the heavy pot to boil early, so the room has a reason to steam. She oils the hinges so doors cannot slam, only close. She stacks kindling for a later hour when a fire will need to be built quickly, insurance against a night that comes home colder than planned. She needs one thing no one can trade back: time. So she steals it. Not with idleness, which would be noticed, but with precision that buys minutes. She learns to fill the bucket in a single pull, to turn the loaf just once in the oven's small sun, to set out a second cup before anyone asks. With those minutes, she copies the shapes from the parish handbill left under a cabbage on market day. She cannot read the words yet, but she can teach her fingers their bones. Letters are small fences. If she owns a few, she can make a pen out of thread and a boundary out of air. She does not hide the ribbon under the ledger shelf again. She moves it to the underside of the bed frame and ties it where dust settles and men do not look. She makes a single notch in the wood beside it, then another the next day, and feels the calendar take root where paper cannot reach. If anyone asks, the noise was a stool dragged across a knot in the floor. No one asks. Evening measures what the day has paid down. John counts the hens and names the missing as fox instead of loss. He eats with the tired relief of a man still ahead by inches. He nods at the swept hearth as if order were a prayer answered. He does not thank her. Gratitude would turn labor into gift, and gift would be a debt of a different kind. Agnes lies down, knowing the house better than it knew her that morning. The ribbon holds. The notches tell the truth only she hears. Outside, the town sleeps neatly. Inside, numbers turn their wheels without sound. The auction ended yesterday. The debt is the part that stays. Quarter sessions would sit at the Guildhall next month. The town practiced its stories. Rumor moves faster than carts. It cuts alleys, slips through shutters, borrows mouths. By the time Sunday comes, Agnes can feel it working under the skin of the square like yeast. Faces arrange themselves into verdicts, kindly, curious, corrected. No one asks her what she calls any of this. They do not need to. A story that fits the town will fit her too. At church, she stands 2 pews behind a woman who braids her daughter's hair with slow, careful fingers. The braid grows, neat as a line in a ledger. The daughter does not look back. The hymn chews its own tail and ends where it started. Outside, men talk about grain and weather. Women trade the measurements that keep houses standing. Agnes listens for her name without appearing to. It walks by on a skirt hem, then on a sigh, then on a joke that wants to be kinder than it is. The constable likes to say that good order is a fence. If you keep your hands inside, no one will speak your name too loudly. Agnes has learned the geometry of small towns. The fence is made of eyes. The gate is made of laughter. If you need proof, watch how a crude remark shrinks when 5 people smile at once. Watch how a truth grows crooked if no one dares to hold it straight. She decides the town will not keep her name better than she can. She boils thread until the color softens into something near ink. She warms a needle between her fingers. She turns her skirt inside out, and, along the hem where only the floor will see, she writes in tiny stitches the sound she keeps behind her teeth. A loop, a line, a letter. It takes 3 breaths to make an A. It takes 6 to make the rest. When she is finished, the cloth looks unchanged. That is the point. A mark that can hide is a mark that can live. John comes home with mud on his boots and a look that tries to be 3 things at once. Fair, tired, unbothered. He says the cow will calve early. He says the clerk nodded when they spoke in the lane. He says the price of oats has found its sense again. He does not say her name. He sets his tools in a straight row and pauses at the knife a half-second longer than the row deserves. Agnes sees the pause and moves the bowl to claim the space. The row looks complete. That is also the point. Clarity arrives as plain as chalk. One sale is an event. A pattern is a culture. A single transfer can be forgiven as misfortune. but a dozen become a custom with its own alibi. The alibi borrows the town's voice. It says things like, better for her, and quiet is mercy, and papers must be kept in order. It calls itself practical. It calls itself kind. It calls itself everything except what it is. People practice their versions for the Guildhall steps. Thomas rehearses a line about debt and temper and the price of wood. John rehearses steadiness. The clerk practices nothing. He has ink for that. Neighbors who saw everything will say they saw nothing. Neighbors who saw nothing will remember a great deal. The square has taught them all where to stand. Agnes chooses her own rehearsal. Not words, she has no platform for words, but the choreography of remaining whole. She walks past the minster and counts the ribs of its shadow. She pauses at the shambles and learns where the street narrows to an ear. She notes which doors swallow gossip and which ones spit it back, better seasoned. She puts a scrap of cabbage under the ledger shelf to remind herself how quickly paper molds when no air reaches it. This isn't justice. It's a trial by comments. By evening, the town's voice has settled into a comfortable pitch. The week will proceed as weeks do: work, weather, worship, market. But under the surface, something keeps the tally. Not the one on John's stick, not the one in Thomas's pocket, not the one in the clerk's neat hand. The other tally, the roll that turns many small humiliations into a habit with a name. When the Guildhall opens its doors, no one will speak of halters. They will speak of order. They will speak of the peace. They will speak of keeping the parish out of scandal. Someone will mention the law. Someone will mention mercy. And the book will be there, waiting to turn breath into entry and entry into memory. Tomorrow has a page already. The town will write it. Agnes will make sure her name is spelled correctly where only she can read it. The crowd believes it keeps people in line. What it really keeps is records. Records do not think. They remember. Ink dries without choosing sides. The Guildhall has its role, the parish its book, and between them a town learns to keep its face straight when speaking about lives. Case 1, told in 4 lines because that is how people prefer pain. A woman came to the square with the halter herself. Her husband's temper had learned to climb stairs faster than she could. The neighbor who offered bread also offered a price. 2 churchwardens stood within earshot, a clerk nearer than mercy. They called it deliverance. The entry called it consideration, and the number did not include bruises. Case 2, kept smaller than it was. A girl barely past 15 was brought to market for a debt that had longer legs than her age. The constable wrote "disorder" on a slip after the shouting soured, fined a man for nuisance, and went home to sleep. The next day, the fine looked like proof the town had done its duty. The buyer promised a winter without hunger and a summer without voices raised. The book accepted a mark and forgot why the mark was made. Case 3, the one people use when they want to pretend the custom is reasonable. A sale refused. A crowd split in half, one side saying, "No shame in necessity," the other saying, "Not today." The clerk kept his feather still. Nothing was written, so, by the logic that keeps tidy towns asleep, nothing happened, except the girl who went home with a room full of eyes lodged under her skin. Agnes hears these stories at the oven queue and in the pauses between prices at the butcher's stall. She does not collect them out of appetite. She collects them because pattern is safer than surprise. Names blur. Rates stay sharp. The town prefers memory that can be balanced against a page. Sometimes the transfer looks like escape. Sometimes it looks like sale. Sometimes it is both, braided so tightly that even the woman at the center cannot pull the strands apart. Consent becomes a word people pronounce with clean lips while their eyes measure a wrist. Necessity stands beside it and nods as if the two were cousins. Quarter Sessions hears of such things only when they snag on the peace. A brawl, a taunt gone rotten, a cup thrown, a fist answered. The magistrate reads the complaint and scolds the noise, not the act. The parish promises it will keep its affairs in daylight. Daylight is the alibi that never runs out. In another village, the hand clasp was the whole ceremony. A price spoken once, a nod repeated twice, an X made under a line someone else drew. In another, a rope made a circle large enough for witnesses to feel included and small enough for shame to stay inside. In another, the halter was only held, a sign to thieves that no one was stealing. Everything was being done as decently as possible, which is to say publicly. Clarity prefers a hard sentence. Parish books remember prices more reliably than names. Agnes learns which parts of a story will not live on paper. The man who said, "Quiet is mercy," to make himself easier to believe. The neighbor who looked away so she could call herself kind. The moment a hand let go of a rope and pretended it had not been holding anything at all. These do not fit in margins already pledged to numbers. She walks past the minster and reads the town by its shadows. Tidiness is the outward sign. Habit is the sacrament. If you want something to be forgiven, you do it where everyone can see it. Then you let the entry take the blame for what the seeing chose not to stop. By week's end, the cases settle into the grain of the square. People stand where they always stand. The market opens and closes like a practiced mouth. The roll grows by one neat line, then another. Daylight keeps everything easy to point at and hard to touch. They say sunlight is proof of decency. Here, it is simply the tool that makes a thing possible and forgettable in the same hour. Daylight. Before summer assizes rolled through York, the parish tried to tidy what daylight had made. Towns do not change their minds, they change their paperwork. The clerk trimmed his entries closer. Churchwardens reminded criers to keep their voices short, their terms shorter, and their ale for after. The constable practiced a new sentence, disturbance to the peace, which could fit any noise the square made when it wanted to forget itself. A crowd that liked clear stories began to like quiet ones better. Word traveled that a magistrate had scolded a brawl and called it nuisance. Some heard caution in the rebuke. Others heard permission wrapped in manners. Meanwhile, a preacher with a tender voice found a way to say that marriage was not a cart to be rehitched in public. He did not name names, he did not need to. He named the square instead, and the square took the point. Customs do not vanish, they get embarrassed. A rope that had felt like proof began to feel like evidence. The halter stayed in hands a little longer before being raised, and sometimes it was not raised at all. The hand clasp, once a ceremony bold enough to invite witnesses, moved sideways, nearer a doorway, nearer a lane, nearer the hush that lets people say they never saw the thing they were standing next to. Some days a sail kept its swagger. Other days it learned to whisper. But every day the parish refined its alibi. Daylight. Nothing hidden, they said, and when a scolded husband muttered, "Nothing blessed either," the clerk coughed ink and wrote "transfer" with letters neat enough to pass inspection. If the square could be convinced that decency was a matter of volume, then a practice need only lower its voice to be good. The wool men who swelled the market at Michaelmas brought new ears. They called the custom rustic, then comic, then untidy. Untidy is the word that frightens tidy towns. A rumor walked the shambles saying the Guildhall disliked paperwork that looked like jokes. Jokes were hard to file. When jokes turn into liabilities, people learn a different laugh. Thomas learned to keep to lanes where his name did not echo. He said he had done the least cruel thing available and waited for the town to agree with him. John learned that a house can be orderly and still carry a rumor like a coal under its tongue. He stacked tools more carefully, squared his shoulders more precisely, and hoped precision looked like virtue to anyone watching from a window. Agnes learned the science of being unremarkable. She carried water level, kept bread unburnt, and hid her stitches where only floors read them. She understood that public comfort was the law's favorite partner, and that a woman who refused to disturb it might pass without comment, even while refusing to vanish. She practiced not vanishing. Some called the custom mercy, an exit where none other existed. Others called it management, a way to move a problem from one ledger to another without leaving a stain. Mercy speaks in the language of pity. Management speaks in the language of risk. Towns listen to both and choose the one that keeps them safest. Did compassion end it, or liability? Ending a practice is not erasing its shadow. It is teaching the square to watch for different shapes. A transaction becomes a rumor becomes a memory that everyone stores in the same drawer and never opens. The parish gets better at saying proper, the constable better at saying peace, the clerk better at leaving spaces where names should be. Fewer halters appear, more doors do the work that rope used to do. When the assizes came, they found little to scold and much to nod at. Good order, quiet streets, markets that returned to market things when the bell asked them to. The town slept well that summer. People said the custom was dying. What they meant was that it had learned to live without asking anyone to write it down. By harvest, the square had a new way of looking exactly the same. Women still crossed it with baskets, boys still counted coins, men still weighed labor against bread. The book stayed neat. The talk grew kinder in daylight and sharper in kitchens. The practice did not end. It practiced discretion. The tidy version of the story closes here, with the town congratulating itself on virtue and the clerk washing his feather clean. But the light that makes entries easy also makes the edges bright. Shadow. The shadow did not end when the market closed. It learned to live in daylight, thin as breath and patient as dust. Agnes woke with it, walked with it, set dishes in a quiet row beside it. A town that prized tidiness could live with a custom so long as it did not jostle the furniture. Shadows do not jostle. They stay where rules put them until the sun moves. John measured the day in work done and temper kept. He called fairness a roof that did not leak and bread that did not burn. He stood at the door each morning to square his shoulders against whatever accounts would visit. He sat each night with tools lined to attention like thoughts he meant to keep. He was not cruel. He was not kind. He was practical in the way Winter is practical brisk, exact, uninterested in stories. Thomas passed by once with a face that wanted to be forgiven and failed. Debt had moved out of his house and left him emptier than he imagined. He said a line about the least worst path and waited for someone to agree. The town had already written its ending and did not need his epilogue. Men who balance a page believe a page will balance them back. Agnes learned ways of not disappearing. She kept water level, ash gathered, bread properly colored. She hid stitches in hems and her ribbon under the bed frame, where dust kept its own counsel. She built a calendar of notches where no clerk could see it, a small roll that recorded the days she kept herself intact. When she could, she paused at the minster to measure her name against the length of its shadow, then tucked the measurement behind her teeth to keep it warm. Some afternoons she bought pins and noticed the price of quiet. Some mornings she crossed the Ouse and noticed the worth of space between a door and a voice. She did not think in coins. She thought in margins. Time bought, breath saved, seconds between the question and the answer where choice could survive. Value arrived in small units and never announced itself. Rate was the word the town preferred. Worth was the word she kept. Clarity likes a hard line. The book closes. The rate keeps collecting interest. A season turned. Michaelmas swelled and slackened. The assizes left town with a nod for orderly streets. People said the practice had faded. They meant it had put on better clothes. A rope that once showed itself now hung folded in a shed. A hand clasp shifted closer to a doorway. Words stayed clean. Eyes did the dirty work. Agnes kept adding to her private ledger. A stitch inside a hem, a corner of a page learned by finger, a minute saved while the pot thought about boiling. She wrote her name where floors could read it and waited for the day she could write it where paper could not refuse it. When she lay down at night, she counted back through the hours and decided what had been spent and what had been kept. Regret was a cost she could not afford. She paid with attention instead. If the town ever forgot the day a rope lifted, her body would not. It had learned the weight of halters and the grammar of crowds. It had learned that a woman can be converted to labor with a joke and a nod. It had learned that daylight is a solvent that takes the color out of shame and leaves the stain. She did not forgive the square for its comfort. She did not hate it for needing to sleep. She learned to step through it without leaving more of herself than a footprint. One evening, as the minster drew its line across the stones, Agnes stopped and tested the air for rain. She thought of the girl who looked back at her through an empty basket, of the neighbor who changed her hand mid-air before touching the ink, of the tool John always placed farthest from the knife. She thought of the page that had closed over her name, and of the quiet that followed. Then she stood where the shadow cooled her shoes and said her name once, aloud this time, as if calling someone home. People will say the custom died. Perhaps it only changed its handwriting. The habit of pricing a life finds new ledgers when old ones are taken away. It hides in contracts, in comfort, in laughter. It waits for crowds that know how to watch without seeing, and it counts on tidy towns to prefer sleep over questions. The square will open its eyes tomorrow. Clerks will sharpen feathers. Coins will change hands for ordinary reasons. A woman will carry water level and keep her breath steady and write her name where only she can read it. The town will call this peace. Decide what a life is worth, then and now.